the monarchy provides with the Constitution, a degree of long-term stability that is actually quite hard to come by any other way. Prince William is furious after Camilla's daughter ruins Princess Anne's birthday party. I've got some upsetting news about Tingland's royal family. Night that should have brought her some joy left her questioning, helpless in the monarchy, and maybe her life choices. But what could Camilla's daughter have said to put in such a state? And how does William plan to defend Princess Anne when the danger comes from within? Join us as we reveal what happened between these women and how William defends Princess Anne after he was completely outraged by Laura's actions, the setup, and the starting incident. It was a carefully planned, beautiful night in the Grand Windsor Castle. Curtains glowed under the chandelier, and the sound of clinking glasses rang across the room. It wasn't just a casual get-together. It was a night for Princess Anne, the hard-working royal. Who had devoted her life to service with a dedication rarely seen in any era. It was her 74th birthday celebration, yet Anne was not slowing down. If anything, her schedule even remained busher than that of other royals half our age. Members of the upper class and senior royalty were gathered there to honor the Princess Royal. A few members of the press hoped to get pictures and maybe even possible headlines. Only they knew what was about to go down. It was in that setting that Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter, stepped in for so long. She had lived away from the spotlight of the royal family. Those ho-followed palace news knew she was not an insider. Instead, she was an in-law, and that gave her more freedom than members of the family. And maybe thought freedom was responsible for a mistake that night. Laura's soft voice carried bold words. ACH spoke to a cluster of guests without holding back. Laura said Anna to duty felt old-fashioned and fattenly younger. Royals should take up the responsibilities. It was when she heard the chokajasps and saw guests widen their eyes that she realized she had made a mistake, but the words were out already and the seriousness already hit the guests. It was one thing to hear criticism from the press, but from the daughter of Thockwin consort, it was even harsher. Laura turned around hoping Anne hadn't heard a thing, but the celebrant was standing just a few feet away. Even though she did not flinch or say a word. Those who knew her well knew her blank face was a kind of masks, had perfected through her long years, but while she could hide her emotions, there was someone else watching in that room who couldn't, and who couldn't decide to react. Prince William, the heir to the throne. But how will he handle hearing his beloved aunt and the monarchy's most devoted worker insulted in front of their peers by someone Tito, his stepmother's world? The sting. It did not take long for word off Laura's comment to spread among the. At first, it moved like a whisper, but it soon became the gossip in conversations held in corners of Thocastle. Within hours, details of Laura's comment slipped into the ears of guests with close ties to the press, though no one dared go on record. The whispers reached the broader public world, and headlines began to appear. The reaction was immediate. Many ordinary Brits were outraged, and social media exploded with defenders of Princess Anne, praising her decades off service and calling Laura's words as newspapers ran profiles of Anne's tireless charity work, subliming readers that she had earned every ounce of respect. But not all voices sided with Anne. A small group of people saw Laura's point and argued that Anne's style of low glamour service belonged to an older generation. Totham, William, and Kate represented their little future. For Anne, distinguished not in the headlines. It was in the source. She had endured decades of public criticism with calm, but hearing such a remark from within her extended family was different. That criticism felt more personal, more hurtful. And then there was William. Watching his aunt absorb the sting with such dignity only fueled his anger. For him, even though Anne's silence was noble, silence in the face of disrespect was not enough. He believed someone who could not be ignored had to stand up for her. But the question is, would he be the fury of a future king? Morning broke over Windsor Castle with the kind of stillness that only follows a night of funes. Even though the golden halls were now empty of guests and music, Laura's careless words had not been forgotten, at least not by Prince William. He had barely slept. All Nithis mind replayed the moment again and again. The tone of Laura's voice and dewness among the guests, but most of all the faint pain he saw in his aunt. By late morning, William Zetian was firm. He could not let it. He needed to face Anne, not as the future king, but as a nephew, unwilling to see his aunt put down when he found her. Anne was already at work, going through briefing papers for her next event. She sat upright like nothing had happened the night before. But when William stepped in, he did not need words to show his upset. She saw it at once. She had watched him grow from boy to man, and she knew his moods better than most people probably do. So when she saw how tightly he clenched his jaw, Anne knew probably had not slept, apart from loyalty to William Feud, that ignoring the insult could hurt the legacy he was born to protect. Laura's insult could get twisted by the press into a story of division. If the world believed the Angers royals saw Anne as outdated, then it would feed the idea of a monarchy divided by age and relevance. That was something William could not tallow. To Anne, it was just words. She had faced more public criticism than this one. Looked like nothing. A single mark at a gathering, even from within the family, was nothing compared to Theodcade's. She had spent buying gun arrested, and yet carrying on. The tension in the room grew heavier. William believed the insult was not only about Anne, but about the values she represented. To ignore it, he felt Wasto open the door for others to question her worth, and by extension, the strength of the family. Anne believed to respond would give their mark power. To let it pass was the stronger move. Neither side was going to give in. Anne leaned on her lifetime of service, refusing to let her path be ficted by a careless slight. William stood in his conviction, unwilling to pretend it had not happened. He wanted to defend her openly, to send a clear signal that loyalty within the family was unshakable. By the time they parted ways at the end of the day, their disagreement remained unresolved. Yet even as William struggled with what to do next, the matter was no longer private. Laura's remark had begun to spread beyond the castle walls. Guests who had witnessed the moment were already whispering, and whispers in royal life had a way of finding their way into Thepris. The question now was not only what William would do, but how Camilla, Laura's mother, would react once the storm reached her, and when it did, whose side would the king take? Therapal effect. By the following turn, the gossip had already act Queen Consort Camilla. In royal circles, whispers traveled faster than carriages, faster than headlines. What had begun as an offhand remark from her daughter now pulsed through the walls of Windsor and Clarence House alike, and at its center was a storm that no one yet knew how to calm. Camilla heard it not from aides or advisors, but from a trusted friend who had attended the dinner. The story was simple. Laura had said Princess Anne's way of service felt out of touch with modern Britain. She heard about William's reaction, how his face had shown open anger, even though Anne herself had kept her composure. That detail struck her hardest. To Camilla, it was not Anne's silence that mattered, but William's anger. He was the future wrecking, and if he had reacted without caution, the situation would no longer be small. Yet to her, Laura had done nothing wrong. After all, Laura carried no public duties, so even if she did speak casually, it was a normal Slaponian could make. Sure, the monarchy has high standards, but Laura isn't she's simply an art curator, and judging her against those standards seemed unfair. In fact, Camilla believed there was a double standard at play. She wondered how William, who was supposed to be Theprim example to the people, would show his temper and yet be protected and even praised as strong or noble. Laura, on the other hand, could make one guarded remark and find herself painted as rude or disrespectful. Camilla knew how fast these judgments spread, and she resented the imbalance. But beneath her anger was a deeper worry. William's fury meant this was more than a family quarrel. If tension spilled into the public eye, the press would frame it as a clash between Theoken's son and the Queen, Consort's daughter. That story of Charles's family bind against Camilla's was one of the most dangerous possible. There was only one person who could solve the issue and save her daughter from the potential danger of Prince William. So that veining, Camilla raised the matter with her husband, King Charles. As soon as he heard, he knew he was once again caught between the people closest to him. It was a very familiar problem, and he had to act fast. Charles's respect for Anne was unquestionable. Not only is she his only sister, but she has also been a rock-solid and tireless force beside him. Through scandals, especially the turbulent years after Diana's death, Anne had never wavered. He admired her loyalty and depended on her strength. In fact, He expected Knowles' of William's devotion to her. At the same time, he also understood Camilla. Camilla had always been loyal to him, even when she got mocked for it. But it is not just him she was loyal to. Her loyalty to her children was even more unbreakable. Laura was not a royal figurehead. She was her daughter, a private citizen accidentally pulled into the glare of palace politics. To Camilla, this was not about rules or symbolism. It was about Amithar protecting her child from unfit. Charles found himself in the middle after two loyalties. On one side stood his sister and his heir, representing duty and tradition. On the other stood his wife and her daughter, representing family and love. The crown didn't shield him from this conflict. If anything, it made the choice harder because unity was vital. A family divided could shake public trust in the monarchy itself. Behind the scenes, palace staff were already taking steps. Aides drafted careful talking points in case the story reached the press. Schedules were shifted to avoid placing William and Laura in the same setting. Discussions about managing appearances became urgent, but these were surface fixes. The real problem was far deeper. As days passed, positions hardened. Camilla grew more protective of her daughter. William remained, firm in his defense of Anne and Charles, torn between them. Saw the anger growing larger with every hour. He knew the whispers could not be contained forever. Sooner or later, they would escape the castle walls and find their way into the press. If the king could not heal the fracture himself, then the monarchy might be forced to weather its latest storm in full public view. Now, how could he bring his family together when none of them were willing to bend? The public encounter. As weeks went by, the public continueto watched the interactions between William, Anne, and Laura. They saw official smiles appear in photographs, saw hands being shaken but beneath it all, Feud remained. The first true test came at a glittering London charity gala, a high-profile evening hosted to raise funds for children's hospitals. The event was supposed to be a showcase of unity the king's family standing together. For a noble cause, yet for those who knew the story, anticipation hung heavy in the air. Would William and Laura cross paths? And if they did, would the tension spill out in front of flashing cameras? The grand ballroom glittered with, and the soft hum of orchestral music floated over the crowd. Guests in evening gowns and Tyler jutes mingled, champagne glasses in hand. Photographers crowded outside, their lenses ready to capture every smile, and when William and Catherine arrived, the energy was no longer thoughtsome. Applause broke out. Flashes lit night sky, and whispers followed with them as they entered. William, tall and composed, looked every inch the heir-to throne. Catherine, elegant in a deep saffron gown, charmed the crowd with a single smile. Together, they showed the grace and stability the monarchy wished to project. But for William, beneath Veckham exterior, there was unease. He knew Laura was present. He had seen her name in the guest list and had braced himself for the unavoidable encounter. Catherine, in tune with his moods, touched his arm lightly as if to anchor him. Across them, Laura stood beside her mother. Camilla's protective presence was obvious, with her hand resting gently but firmly on her daughter's elbow, guiding her through conversations and keeping her close. Laura herself looked uneasy. Though she smiled politely, there was a stiffness in her posture, a weariness in her eyes. She knew all too well that the night might bring her face to face with William, and it did. The moment arrived in the middle of the evening near the edge of the ballroom. William and Catherine, making their way through a circle of donors, found themselves face-to-face with Camilla and Laura. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. William Minkland, his head in the barest of nods. His expression was polite, but cold. There was no warmth, no trace of theosy, courtesy he usually offered. His gaze flicked briefly to Laura, steady and firm. Laura, clearly unsettled. Attempted asmal smile that faltered under Hyson wavering gaze. Shifting nervously between her glass and his eyes, as if hoping the moment would pass quickly, the silence between them stretched too long. Nearby guests noticed, their conversations faltering as they sensed chill. The air thickened with unspoken words, and the gallus polish head leggings seemed to crack at the edges. Camilla, ever quick to protect, moved with decisive. She slipped her arm through Laura's and steered her gently away, murmuring something under her breath. To the casual observer, it looked like nothing more than a mother getting her daughter across the room, But to those who saw the stiffness in William's posture and the swiftness of Camilla's intervention, the truth was clear. Anne, elsewhere in the room, carried on with her usual composure. Chas spoke passionately with donors about the importance of the evening's cause, her steady presence reminding all of her tireless commitment. Yet even she could not entirely hide the burden she carried. Those closest to her noticed said flicker of weariness in her eyes, the subtle heaviness in her shoulders. She was the one at the center of yet she bore it in silence as she always had. By the end of the night, the gala had raised impressive sums for charity. But behind the scenes, another story had taken root. Guests whispered about the brief, frosty exchange. Journalists walk out wind of the tension beset each other what they could. And by morning, headlines would hint at division without daring to state I to trite. For William, the evening confirmed with already knew. The wound had deepened, and now, with whispers threatening to spill into a full-blown scandal. It was clear to King Charles that the matter could no longer be left to fade on its own. The question was no longer if he would step in, could the king bring his fractured family together at a table, or would his attempt at mediation only expose the cracks further? The king's intervention. When the tension became impossible to endure, King Charles acted. He called for a private meeting at Clarence House, inviting only 4 people. William, Anne, Camilla, and Laura. It was meant Tobe, a family summit and private, but it carried the weight of centuries. The monarchy had weathered storms before, but its survival always depended on unity. Charles began with calm words about respect and togetherness. But beneath the surface, every person in Theorem carried a different burden. William came in with a firm resolve. His loyalty to Anne was absolute, and he saw Laura's remark not as a slip, but as a blow-tough foundation of duty. An ever-practical entered without expectation. She had lived long enough to know that family disputes rarely ended in perfect peace. Camilla arrived with her guard up, ready to defend her daughter against judgment she felt was unfair. Laura came nervous but unbowed, unwilling to let her name carry shame for words she believed had been twisted out of shape. The discussion unfolded slowly like a William insisted that disrespect were Anne weakened, not just her but family's standing. Laura argued her words had been misread. Camilla defended her daughter, insisting she was not the crown bearer, and reminded them bluntly thought in this family, perception often carried as much weight as truth. Round and round it went. Charles tried to hold middle ground, but every attempt to cool the fire only revealed how hot it already burned. There was no apology, no agreement, no sense of closure. When the meeting ended, the silence in the room was colder than the words that had filled it. What began as a single remark at a castle reception had now hardened into a rift that even the king himself could not repair. If Charles could not bridge loyalty to a sister and loyalty to a daughter, what hope did the rest of the family have of healing? The lingering, unspoken tension. The Clarence House summit ended without victory. What followed was not reconciliation. The Windsors knew better than anyone how to keep up appearances, and they slipped into the routine like seasoned actors. Smiles at public events, handshakes, balcony waves, all the rituals continued. Yet beneath them ran a current of frost. Weeks turned into months, and palace staff learned to manage the fracture like an Events were arranged with military precision to keep William and Laura apart. Seating plans for banquets were debated and redrawn to avoid awkward glances. Even Christmas at St. Morgamel, unpredictable in its traditions, became a puzzle of placement and timing. Every walk to church, every place at the dinner table was chosen, not for ceremony, but for damage control. William carried himself with the dignity of a future king, but in private he felt cost. He had defended Anne and had believed it was the right thing to do, yet the price was an undercurrent off-strain with Camilla and by extension with his father. For William, it was not about one sentence at a party. It weighs about principle, about drawing a line in defense of respect. Anne carried on with her usual pace. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But those closest to her noticed the faintest difference of shadow in her eyes, a coolness when Laura's name was mentioned. Criticism from newspapers or strangers had never troubled her. But this wound came from inside the family circle, and that made it harder to brush aside. Laura's world grew smaller. Though she had never been a public royal, She now lived with Vegler of unwanted attention. Newspapers labeled her careless, ambitious, or divisive. Her work in the art world continued, but whispers followed Herthier too. What once felt like thebulissing of royal connection now felt like a curse. Camilla grew more protective as the weeks went by. She saw her daughter cast in headlines as a villain and resented every word of it. She believed Laura was being judged not for what she said, but for who she was. The daughter of a Quinwo had once been seen as an outsider herself. Charles, more than anyone, felt toll. He had hoped the summit would calm the waters, but it only froze them in place. The family was outwardly wool, but inwardly divided. For Aching, who dreamed of stability, the fracture was its own kind of failure. The Windsors walked on, polished and practiced, but avoidance was not a recipe. The silence between William and Laura was heavy, and silence cannot hold forever. How long could the family balance on this thin line before one wrong step sent them tumbling into another storm? The lasting impact? Time moved forward, as it always does. But in the House of Windsor, time did not erase the fracture. It covered it. The family rehearsed unity with skill, but the truth remained beneath the... William and Catherine toured schools and charities, smiling with children and families. Anne worked tirelessly. Her schedule still packed with visits and ceremonies, the embodiment of steady service. Charles and Camilla stood side by side at state events. Every inch the king and queen consort, Laura withdrew into her private life, determined to let the noise fade. On the outside, it looked as though the monarchy had carried on without a dent. But within the palace walls, there was no forgetting. William's loyalty to Anna depended, but so did his distance from Camilla. Anne herself never voiced a complaint, but her silence was edged with memory. Camilla balanced her public role with private protectiveness, carrying through it of her daughter's hurt. Charles, above them all, saw his vision of harmony slip further away. The truce that followed was uneasy. Family gatherings were careful. Conversations were polite, not close. Every look, every pause, every silence carried meaning. It was survival, not healing. The public saw awkward glances and stiff smiles, but nothing more. The monarchy survived as it always had by polishing its sip, but those who lived inside it knew that something had shifted forever. For Laura, the remark became a mark she could not shed. For William, it was a test of loyalty that left him cautious. For Ran, it was a reminder that even family could wound. For Camilla, it was proof that her children would always be measured against the monarchy. And for Charles, it was the bitter truth. Fate of a king could not command peace at home. The storm ended, not with reconciliation, but with silence. The family carried on, smiling for cameras while walking on fractured ground. The monarchy endured, but the scars remained. Do you think Laura was right about Princess Anne's methods being outdated? How long do you think the silent treatment will last? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy